Hello there! So, of all the gimmicks maps could have, circles only and sliders only are the two most straightforward. Unlike most ideas, you don't need to be focused on anything subtle to understand them. It's just a matter of taking the two object types and eliminating one throughout a map, which anyone should be capable of recognizing given how much of an impact they have on gameplay. A circle-only map ruins your fingers, while a slider-only map relieves all the stress of accuracy. The simplicity of these gimmicks is probably why they've been used on a good handful of maps, old and new alike. Really, before fancy gimmicks became the cool new thing, mappers of the Dark Ages made circle and slider only maps, though most were really easy. I've even made maps under the two limitations, through which I learned that despite being so related in concept, they offer different challenges and require different mapping focuses to effectively pull off. These focuses aren't fully apparent by just playing or looking at the maps though. They're most easily understood by being a mapper and facing the difficulties that they have to offer. So, in this video, let's talk about my experiences with creating circle and slider only maps, covering those obstacles and what I think is necessary to map each style well. So, some background. I've always considered sliders more interesting to map than circles. They allow expression on multiple levels, first with rhythm through active, hold, and passive bits, then with movement through slider leniency, velocity, plus a direction they force players to follow, and lastly with perception through slider shapes that visually reflect music. Circles, on the other hand, are just sliders without the interesting parts. Being more expressive in general, I've always put more of my thought into how sliders are designed, so transitioning into map creation with only sliders was actually pretty easy. I made my first slider-only map 2 years ago, and thanks to those elements of expression I listed off, I was able to represent music fine in every way except one: rhythm choice. With a required passive element between each active one, a lot of rhythms just didn't work, so I was forced out of my comfort zone. I was forced to think about rhythm a bit differently and utilize strict patterning in the worst of situations. Here's an example of how this played out. Looking only at that last measure, there's only two instruments worth paying attention to: the trumpet playing a note every half a beat, and the drums, which only really stand out here because there's a major variation. If deciding rhythm normally, I'd probably do something like this: 2 half-beat sliders and a circle that prioritizes trumpet stuff, then circles on each snare drum afterwards because it's the most featured instrument at that point. For slider-only rhythm though, I'd need to do some replacements. Drums turning into 1/4 and 1/2 sliders is fairly natural, but this circle on beat 3 can't do a 1/4 slider because it would blend with the following circle too much. Only option is to give less emphasis to the white tick, which at the time I would normally avoid, through a reverse slider here. It's an okay alternative at best, and structuring rhythm with this mentality in an entire map was kinda difficult for me because I wasn't used to it. Unfortunately, not all parts of a song have convenient slider-only alternatives. Cover it with a 1/2 slider, then I'm missing out on the next note since clicking here is necessary. 2 1/2 sliders would be even weirder to follow another instrument here. There's no great options, especially due to how calm the song is here. If it were more intense, I could easily include some overmapped passive slider ends, which luckily was the case for the second half of the song. Yeah, the map is a lot more engaging here. With a double BPM style drum beat, I was able to stick in 1/4 sliders all over the place and nobody batted an eye. This gave me a lot more freedom, but at the same time restricted the ways I could show actual 1/4 in the music. Some places I had to think a little differently. In this situation, I would have repeated the same rhythm twice, yet because there's a stream right afterwards, having an overmapped 1/4 slider here, followed by a bunch of non-overmapped 1/4 sliders, would be like treating all these the same, which they're not. I couldn't work around rhythm like that here though, and in hindsight, this is by far the biggest regret I have with the map. I'm forcing slider rhythm by including back-to-back 1/4 sliders, even though they represent extremely different parts of the music. Elsewhere in the map, I at least contrasted 1/4 sliders with 1/4 reversing sliders, which still sucked, but none of that was going on here. To keep this slider only, what other possibilities were there though? Making all sliders start on weak sounds and end on strong ones? Honestly, despite how bad that feels in this situation, it's better than 1/4 sliders that have very little contrast. Me of the past had a very different opinion though. The only semi-saving grace is how I managed patterning. Throughout the map up until this point, whenever there were snare drum triples like this, I overlapped the 1/4 slider in the following 1/2 slider. Hopefully the repeated pattern and the slide SV change led people to separate the poorly contrasting 1/4 sliders. Though realistically, that's just putting way too much faith in the average player. While that was my biggest regret, what most people probably find the worst is the various sliders that really have no reason to be sliders. these 1/8 sliders appear at the ends of phrases and before breaks, and their sole purpose is to act like circles. They're using a different rhythm for the sake of fitting a gimmick, which most people find to be the worst part of restricted mapping like this. If you're doing something gross just to adhere to an idea, it might not be a good idea. But then again, is it worth it to ruin map's concept just for the sake of a few minor exceptions? Not like a 1/8 slider is butchering the song, it's just silly. Being ranked, you know what my stance was on this at the time, though I still do think this and many other aspects of my slider-only mapping could have easily been improved upon. Poor design choices shouldn't be excused for a gimmick. Ideally, they should be worked around in other ways that I guess I couldn't imagine at the time. And so, a year and a half later, I gave slider-only mapping another chance. My song choice may have taken a plunge, but at least my understanding of mapping had improved. At this point in time, I was more capable of forming rhythm under different circumstances, and I was overall more lenient with the clicking strong sounds aspect of rhythm, which actually let me follow the music better than in that last map. Difficulty had something to do with that. Being a much easier map, I allowed myself to vary between full beat and half beat rhythms more, so I wouldn't need to worry about the potential 1/2 spam that ruined sections of the previous map. Using mostly filler rhythm is how people ordinarily map, myself included, but when there's no circles to bring in variety, it ends up being super repetitive, and I didn't consider that earlier. The way I handled 1/4 on this map was, in my opinion, better too. With a bit of luck through no vocals landing on the end of drum rolls, I chose rhythm that prioritized vocals while still covering the streamy sounds. That meant for no awkward 1/4 sliders without contrasts, or 1/8 sliders that might as well just be circles. Over the 1.5 years between these maps, I learned how to better show large-scale song changes through slider design concepts, such as the sharper curves in the slow section compared to the wider ones in a different section, or the cool sliders sync to a highly standout part of the song. My old map was closer to what some people call freeform with its placements. There was less organization, but that wasn't a huge problem because sliders are representative of music enough through their slider velocity, relative spacing, and whatnot already. Even without patterns, players could feel the music. If I had to guess though, I think this freeform style of mapping wouldn't fly if I were to make a map exclusively from the other object type, from circles. I'm a bit late to the party. For whatever reason, I always avoided mapping circles only because I thought it would just be boring. They're underdeveloped sliders after all, and having mapped with sliders only, it would just be more of the same rhythm choice struggle, right? My expectations were completely out of line, and I honestly should have known better. When mapping this song, I had a fairly easy time deciding rhythm because this song is from a rhythm game, and circles only is how a lot of rhythm games are structured already. For Osu though, rhythm alone isn't enough obviously. Unlike slider-only maps, placements were where I had to focus all of my mapping energy. I had taken for granted so many aspects of sliders and needed to artificially create them through circle arrangements, which freeform me of the past would be most likely incapable of doing. To explain what I mean by focusing on placements to express music, let's look at the first section of the song here. I showed the song's build-up through a sort of pattern evolution. The first group here increased in spacing, the second increased in spacing and had some weird rotational direction changes, the third group upped density, and the fourth did those same weird directional changes. If I had sliders though, I wouldn't need to think this much. I could just do a gradual SV increase or show changes to slider shapes, both of which would have been way easier. Circle-only mapping forced me to think more critically about object positions since that's the biggest element controlling expression, and that, of course, applied to the whole map. While I did say rhythm choice wasn't much of a concern, I should clarify that that's true in the case of avoiding mistakes. It's easy to make musically correct rhythm with only circles, but making interesting rhythm is another story. Constant 1/2 rhythm like we experience normally would be the worst outcome for a circles-only map, so in certain sections, I switched things up by using a lot of 3/4 and full beat gaps. Rhythm density let me show what sections were more or less intense, and specific rhythms became identifiers for sections as a whole, such as doubles here. This is the only section that does it. What I think is important to understand above all else when circle-only mapping is the value of showing phrases through placements. I mentioned I did these on the previous map, and while they were a nice bonus to it, I'd argue that they're necessary on a circle-only map. Patterns expressing similar parts of the music, like these small phrases all using the same back and forth movement, or these 3/4 jumps all being perfect triangles, are the only ways to express things that are inherent for sliders, like shape, direction, and velocity. This idea is also the foundation that makes special parts of a map actually feel special. These new combo spam moments are perhaps the most contentious part of the map, but also the most necessary. If I had sliders, I could use cool slider shapes and fast slider velocities to show the standout parts of music, but those and pretty much all fancy mapping techniques are restricted to sliders. I needed something else, and going from clean patterning into crazy new combo spam and messy stream chaos was the best available option with circles only. So overall, what mapping this taught me was how important the clarity of placements is without sliders to naturally express music. You can't rely on automatic feeling evoking tools. You need to evoke those feelings yourself through design ideas that you wouldn't use in ordinary maps. And that means you can't just treat circles like 99% of maps do either, as a binary jump for 1/2 or stream for 1/4. Spacing control is one of the biggest variables for showing those phrases I've been talking about. Making every half-beat gap a jump that simply adheres to relative spacing emphasis can follow the music, but I don't think it can lead to a solid map, especially when mapping with circles only. Anyway, that's about it. Mapping with sliders or circles only makes for both a fun and personally informative experience. If you're ever feeling bored of mapping or want to expand how you think about maps, limiting yourself in either of these ways could be worth the time. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next week.